Hello everybody, how's it going? I hope you are doing well. Since I published my last episode, I have been down some very deep, very dark, and twisted rabbit holes researching alleged medical malpractice and drug abuse in Opus Dei. As is so often the case with this sort of thing, I have not just found a little, I have found a lot, and I'm still working my way through organizing all of the information and figuring out how I want to tell this story. So that is not what we are going to be getting into today. But while I have been working on all of that, I have also been working on some other side projects that are related to my deep dive into Opus Dei and the deep dive project here as a whole. And it's given me a chance to be even more granular in the research that I'm doing, which I think is good. And because of that, I have been thinking a lot about how I understand Opus Dei as an organization, and that is what I want to talk about today. In essence, without getting too ahead of myself, I want to sort of set the record straight and revise my position on Opus Dei and explain why I have the perspective that I do and speculate about what I think can be deduced from this much more nuanced understanding that I now have. We are also going to be getting into some interesting stuff that I learned about Opus Dei's connections to the 2024 U.S. presidential election, and I have a feeling you're going to want to know what I found. And then lastly, I'm going to briefly discuss my initial thoughts on Gareth Gore's new book, Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. So this is going to be a little bit of a patchwork episode because none of these topics are necessarily complex enough to devote an entire hour-and-a-half long episode to. But these are things that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, so I want to take the opportunity today and do just that. I have broken this entire episode down into chapters, so feel free to skip around to whatever interests you the most. But I think that is enough of an intro for this episode. Welcome to the Deep Dive Project. So before we get into it, I do have some general housekeeping stuff to get out of the way. First of all, this is just a reminder that all of my sources are linked in the description of this video, along with details to connect with me via social media and support my work monetarily if you so desire. I want to say a huge thank you to my supporters, particularly Todd M., Paul Belscheid. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. Phil T. Martin, Terry Wolford, Ellis Subversive, and B. Lilly. Your support made it possible for me to upgrade my sound system and get this beautiful mic that I am currently speaking in, and I'm just really, really excited to be able to invest more into the work that I am doing here and to continue to make improvements, because while I would be doing this regardless of monetary incentives, the money, it was not the reason why I started in the first place, and it won't be the reason that I continue. Knowing that there are people who are willing to spend real money supporting what I am doing does lend all of this credibility, and I want you to know that not only am I incredibly grateful, but that I take what I am doing here very, very seriously. In that same vein, I have gotten a lot of feedback on my content, how I present it here, how I organize my videos, and I appreciate it. I'm going to be doing my best to implement some of the suggestions that I have gotten because some of you had some great points. So if you have suggestions for topics that you think that I should research or ways that I can make my content more accessible for more people, please do leave a comment down below. I read every single comment, even if I don't respond to them. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the first topic at hand and the elephant in the room, my evolved perception of Opus Dei and what I think it implies about the organization. So for most people, the name Opus Dei, work of God in Latin, might tickle the brainstem, hearkening back to Dan Brown's infamous book and movie adaptation, The Da Vinci Code. For reasons that only Mr. Brown knows, he chose to create the character Silas, an albino monk who flagellates himself with a rope whip. Now, Opus Dei doesn't have monks and members don't wear habits, but for better or for worse, the book and film exposed Opus Dei to public scrutiny for the first time. They used that notoriety to launch a PR campaign colloquially referred to as Operation Lemonade, and it largely set the tone for how Opus Dei would respond to criticism going forward. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that fact has anything to do with what I'm about to get into, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a pretty significant footnote in the organization's history and worth mentioning. As an aside, I have never read or watched the Da Vinci Code, despite what some people seem to think. I get comments from people who seem to be under the impression that I am forming my entire basis for critiquing Opus Dei and all of my opinions from the Da Vinci Code, and that's really amusing to me because I've never seen it, I've never read it. I was actually thinking it might be kind of funny, tongue-in-cheek funny, some point down the road, maybe when this channel hits its next huge milestone, to do a watch party and hang out with everybody and watch the Da Vinci Code, because I've never seen it, but it does come up a lot in my research, and obviously people think that it's where I am forming all of my opinions from, even though that's not true. I don't know. It's an idea. I'm just spitballing, but I've never seen and I've never read the book, so I don't know what you want to do with that information if you're one of those people who assumes that that's where I'm getting all of my perspectives and opinions from. But yeah. When I look back at the videos that I made 2 and 3 years ago, I view the approach that I took in covering Opus Dei as slightly unacquainted. The position that I came from was not representative of a complete evolved thought. Now, from a certain point of view, that makes sense because I was coming from the situation as an outsider, and at the time, the only information that I had to inform my opinion came from a smattering of articles over the years and a couple of books. And I do not want to detract from how important and worthwhile early coverage of Opus Dei has been, if for no other reason than that it's aided me in breadcrumbs searching my way through this immense topic. But with that said, within the last year or so, a question has grown in my mind, and it's one that my earlier perception of Opus Dei was not able to satisfactorily answer. It is the logical next step in my overarching line of inquiry into Opus Dei, but I didn't have a good answer for it. Why is Opus Dei so connected to so many crucial cultural issues, and what does that imply about the organization? This isn't really something I've seen many, if any, news articles discuss. The majority of the time, these articles have treated Opus Dei's presence as a foregone conclusion, assuming that the reasoning behind it is based on some sort of conspiratorial campaign to take over the world. In my opinion, though, based on what I know today, I think that that perspective is not only overly simplistic and incorrect, but it completely misses the point. And what I mean by oversimplification is when the press will write about issues connected to Opus Dei and they'll say things like, Opus Dei did X or Opus Dei did Y, as if the organization is this cunning, all-knowing, all-seeing power with an extensive army to command. When it comes to understanding Opus Dei as a force in our world, the context is important, which is why I take issue with that perspective. As I present my thesis here today, I also want to point out that there are actually 2 issues lurking underneath the Opus Dei umbrella. The first issue is the organization's internal structure and the alleged high-control environment that it fosters for its numeraries and numerary assistant members. This bleeds into a host of human rights issues, and becoming aware of that was the primary reason I have continued to cover this organization and its alleged crimes. For all its relative obscurity, Opus Dei has had a profound impact on societies the world over. And of course, there are plenty of organizations, religious and secular, that can say the same. But in my opinion, Opus Dei is worthy of scrutiny because of the fact that the organization has been implicated in some atrocious human rights violations, which it has yet to seriously and authentically acknowledge. I have numerous episodes at this point talking about that fact, and I have occasionally, not often, but pretty consistently every now and again, had some bright spark in my comment section telling me off for my continued criticisms of Opus Dei. But I want to point out, and please hear this, that it is perfectly reasonable and rational to question whether or not an organization that has been accused of the kinds of things that Opus Dei has is the type of organization that we want involved in our society. If you care about the world that we live in and the well-being of your fellow man, these are conversations that we must have. We have to. And at least here on this channel, we are going to continue doing exactly that, because this is my space and I will talk about whatever I want to, however I want to talk about it. The second issue is what we will be addressing in this episode, which is how embedded Opus Dei has become in the cultural and political landscape here in the United States and elsewhere, and what that tells me about the organization as a whole. I want to spend a little bit of time going over a condensed history of the organization for the sakes of anyone tuning in for the first time who maybe doesn't have all of the contextual information. It will also help me illustrate the point that I am working my way towards. It's important to remember that Opus Dei came up through a very tumultuous time in Spanish history. A Spanish priest named Jose Maria Escriva created the organization after he claimed to have had a divine revelation in which he saw Opus Dei as a way for ordinary, non-religious people to sanctify their lives through their work. And by the way, this is something that Gareth Gore digs into pretty extensively within the first bit of his book, and it was really interesting to learn more about Escriva's obsession with creating Opus Dei and the numerous compromises that he made in order to build the bedrock of what we have today. But the organization's early years were marked by political and social unrest and religious persecution in Spain as the country became embroiled in a civil war. And there is truly no overstating how bloody and violent that conflict was. If you don't know a whole lot about the Spanish Civil War, I invite you to go out and read up on it a little bit and educate yourself, because not only is it really, really interesting and very tragic, but it also, I think, explains a lot about Opus Dei, which is something we're going to continue to get into here. Following the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939, Escriva established Opus Dei's first headquarters in Madrid, although the organization's international headquarters are now located in Rome. The organization received scrutiny from church clergy almost immediately. It was perceived as a dangerous force with a secretive character, with some referring to it as a form of Christian masonry. Escriva felt that his organization was impossible for outsiders to understand, a belief that is still alive and well within Opus Dei today. However, despite the pushback, Opus Dei rapidly spread throughout Spain and the rest of the world. Initially, only men could join, but Escriva eventually opened membership up to women as well, walking back vehement statements that he had made earlier about his organization being men only. And that is just one example of a compromise that Escriva made in creating this ostensibly divinely inspired organization. I think it's worth asking the question that if this organization is so divine and inspired by such a heavenly source, why it would need to be changed and revised and altered so many times throughout its formation. But that may be a conversation for another day. Opus Dei received approval as a Catholic organization in 1950 and was made a personal prelature in 1982. A personal prelature, for those who are unaware, is a canonical structure within the Catholic Church characterized by non-territorial jurisdiction, hierarchical structure, and a focus on specific pastoral activities. And Opus Dei is not the Catholic Church's only personal prelature, but it is the most well-known. Due to Opus Dei's stated policy of neither confirming nor denying an individual's membership status, disparity between what the organization claims its numbers are versus what former members report, along with the impression created from leaked internal documents and a feature of the Code of Canon Law, Code 294, which defines what a personal prelature is and who may fall under its jurisdiction. It states, for example, that only ordained clergymen are recognized members of Opus Dei, while lay people have no recognized status by the Catholic Church. it is difficult, if not completely impossible, to determine how many members Opus Dei has. And this fact has become a sticking point, and one which Opus Dei has yet to fully clarify, calling into question its imposed authority over the lay men and women who devote their time to the organization. This has also led some people to accuse Opus Dei of being schismatic in nature and basically being in direct conflict with the Catholic Church. Now, as I had stated previously, Opus Dei was subject to lots of scrutiny and controversy pretty much from the get-go, and several of these controversies centered around Escrivá himself. While the organization continues to venerate him, treating important dates in his life as celebratory feast days, numerous former members who were alive and knew Escrivá during his life have alleged that he was a fan of totalitarian leaders like Hitler and Franco. They have also alleged that he was a misogynistic narcissist with a violent temper and delusions of grandeur who encouraged the cult of personality many believe now exists. Additionally, many people, former members and non-members alike, felt that his cause for canonization was rushed and that the Vatican did not do its due diligence in thoroughly investigating his life, willfully ignoring any testimony that ran counter to the exalted image that he and his organization had fostered. Other controversies range from the relatively mundane to the outright criminal. The organization has been accused of being secretive and elitist, exercising undue influence within the Catholic Church and other secular institutions, particularly in politics and finance, focusing on recruiting wealthier, influential people, employing sect-like practices, including excessive control over members' lives, and promoting a culture of obedience that has been viewed as manipulative. But perhaps most concerning, at least in my opinion, are the allegations of grooming and labor trafficking. Opus Dei has been accused of using its various educational institutions and youth programs to target children as young as 12 and 13 years of age for recruitment as celibate numeraries. Allegations have surfaced that Opus Dei members have targeted and essentially groomed children into making a lifelong commitment to an organization before they were capable of understanding the implications, fabricating and fomenting a vocational crisis and encouraging these children to lie to and isolate themselves from their families who are unaware of their children's involvement. According to recent accounts from former members, they were also encouraged as juvenile recruits to use the discipline, which is the rope whip members use to flagellate their backs and buttocks, and the cilice, a spiked chain worn around the upper thigh, as a form of corporal mortification, an accusation that has given rise to intense concerns about child safety and welfare. Additionally, Opus Dei has been accused of labor trafficking, particularly in connection to the treatment of its domestic workers, the assistant numeraries, by violating labor laws and basic human rights. The organization was sued and convicted of labor law violations back in 2016 in France, and based on what we are seeing coming out of Argentina, they may be facing a similar situation there in the not too distant future. We are very hopeful that the victims of this organization are going to start making some headway in the criminal courts. But if you are not up to speed with the situation in France, I have a video pinned here that will catch you up to speed, and other articles pertaining to the entire discussion are in my source document down below. But in a nutshell, critics and former members alike have alleged that Opus Dei specifically recruits young women from economically disadvantaged backgrounds with promises of education and employment, only for the women to find themselves in conditions resembling servitude with long hours, little to no pay, and few social benefits. The women who have spoken out about what they endured allege that the organization exerted strict control over their daily lives and that they were not fully informed of their rights or the nature of the work that they would be doing before they joined, and that they were manipulated and coerced into working for Opus Dei under the guise of religious duty. Despite the fact that women from South America, the United States, the UK, Ireland, Australia, and elsewhere have all spoken out and their accounts and experiences are chillingly similar, Opus Dei has continued to vehemently deny these accusations. Now, as the tensions surrounding the 2024 U.S. presidential election continue to build, the organization has been pulled into the fray once again. Reporters, journalists, and citizen investigators have exposed its connections to extremely high-profile individuals such as Leonard Leo, Peter Thiel, Timothy Bush, Kevin Roberts, and even J.D. Vance. It extends to influential organizations like the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, the Napa Institute, and agendas like Project 2025. The reasons for these connections have been hotly debated. Some have posited that Opus Dei is a powerful, secretive organization with a global influence, like a religious Illuminati. The organization itself has refuted those claims, consistently falling back on statements that it is purely invested in the improvement of society through the formation of the individual. Therefore, any political or social action taken by the individual in question is totally unilateral and unrelated to Opus Dei. However, it is impossible to deny that for better or worse, Opus Dei is a consistent thread running through and ostensibly connecting numerous influential people. Understanding the reason for that and what it indicates about the organization itself and the individuals attracted to it has become crucial. And it's something that I have been working to get my arms around for several years. But since becoming aware of Project 2025 and the Opus presence within it, it's something that has finally begun to feel more substantive. So we have now arrived at the core of my thesis, and I want to share it with you because I think it has value. In my opinion, Opus Dei is a metaphorical conduit. Knowing what I know, it seems to me that the organization functions as an intermediary or facilitator for transmitting ideas, resources, information, and individuals. Escriva referred to Opus Dei as a disorganized organization, and I believe that that is accurate. While I don't want to give Escriva very much credit, when it comes to understanding the organization and being able to pin down exactly what it is, nobody would understand that better than the man who cooked the whole thing up. In my opinion, Opus Dei is simply not capable of being the Machiavellian puppet master that some have attempted to expose it as. And I know some people probably will not be very happy that I am disagreeing with that characterization, but it doesn't have to be this puppet master. And that also doesn't mean that its presence is any less telling. The clues to understanding this entire thing are in Opus Dei's own history. Radical traditionalism is baked into the bedrock of Opus Dei. It came up through a violent time in Spanish history and managed to not only survive, but thrive under fascist dictator Franco's regime. What does that say about the psychology of the people involved? Trauma and catastrophe can create a pressure cooker that results, for some, in fanaticism. Strict adherence and allegiance to something bigger than the individual can offer a sense of structure and safety during trying times. From my perspective, it is not so surprising that, given the context of Opus Dei's creation and history, it continues to appeal to individuals who respond to political and social unrest by, to use J.D. Vance's own rhetoric, circling the wagons and loading the muskets. Because of Opus Dei's traditional mindset and fascist influences, which are an undeniable and unfortunate fact, as well as its dogged dedication to the charism Jose Maria Escriva envisioned, it continues to attract like-minded individuals who are, generally speaking, bright, intellectual, and dogmatic. I think the fact that these persons happen to be involved in social, political, and religious endeavors is more of a reflection of the individuals themselves rather than of Opus Dei. But that does not mean that Opus Dei isn't happy to facilitate the coming together and joining of minds and agendas. After all, circling back once again to Escriva, he viewed the influence of professionals, particularly those in academia, law, politics, and business, as essential for advancing Christian values in society. For those who are attracted to Opus Dei's conduit and ideology, the belief that its Christian values are the best and highest for a society to follow is a foregone conclusion. Now, in the interest of full disclosure and having a nuanced conversation, and while this is purely anecdotal and alleged, I do want to mention that I have heard from a handful of former members who were involved with Opus Dei in different parts of the world that not only were they repeatedly reminded during meditations and circles of the importance of infiltrating all levels of society in order to sanctify them and bring them into alignment with God, but that during elections and other important political events in their countries, they would be subtly and sometimes not so subtly directed to vote or support one candidate over another. Now, it is impossible to know how widespread this type of behavior is, whether or not this is something that's coming down all the way from Rome, or whether this is just some activism that a few directors on the regional level are taking the initiative to do. But I do want to mention it because I am totally open to having my mind changed at some later date. If more information comes out, if something more definitive gets exposed, if we become aware of some other facet of this entire thing that exposes Opus Dei as being much better organized than I honestly think that they are, then I am definitely open to having my mind changed. And that's why I want to mention this, just within the full context of the conversation that we're having. However, I still think that it's a lot more likely that Opus Dei functions more as a conduit for connecting all of these people who have all of these similar ideologies and agendas than it is some type of military leader commanding this army of drones. Does that make sense? At any rate, when viewing all of this in its full context, is it any wonder that an Opus thread runs through so many of the individuals and organizations moving and shaking our social and political landscape here in 2024? After all, birds of a feather will flock together. It's only natural. In order to rationally and logically contend with people like Leo, Teal, Vance, and so on, it's crucial to understand the role Opus Dei's ideology plays. In my opinion, it's not a grand conspiracy, but it is nuanced and significant. I think if this theory has merit, you could make some pretty solid deductions about the convictions and beliefs of those connected to Opus Dei. So let me know what you think and how all of this stacks up with your perception of Opus Dei if you have one. Additionally, I'm curious to know what your position is on an organization like this being so wrapped up in education, politics, business, law, the whole nine yards. Do you think that that implies anything specific about Opus Dei? And if so, what? If you think that I'm off base and you think that Opus Dei truly is this masterful organization, I would be curious to hear your rationale behind that as well. Now, I want to switch gears a bit and circle back to my earlier reference to J.D. Vance's connections to Opus Dei because I think it meshes well with the overall topic of conversation here today. And this is something that I have spent a decent amount of time looking into, and even so, I do not think that all of the information that I dug up is even half the truth. I think that more is likely to emerge in the coming months and years, and it'll be really interesting to see what we find out. But I wanted to share what I have learned thus far, even if it isn't a lot, just again, in the interest of having an open and frank conversation and a free exchange of ideas. If you know something more that I don't discuss here, please leave a comment down below, and even better if you can include a source with that as well, because for some of the things that I have heard, it's been difficult to find an actual substantial source or proof that those statements and claims are true. And here on the Deep Dive Project, we are invested in the examination of fact, not fiction. So keep that in mind when you are providing feedback and information on anything that you might know. I can't use anything that feels like hogwash. I can't use anything that I can't independently fact check and substantiate in some way. I'm not interested in peddling in fiction or in myths. I'm trying to create a very intellectual project here. So keep that in mind. But unbeknownst to the American public, Trump's vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, who is a recent convert to Roman Catholicism as of 2019, has been plugged into a network of influential individuals and organizations, including Opus Dei, thanks to people like Heritage's Kevin Roberts, American entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and political activist Peter Thiel, and Napa Institute founder Tim Bush. Let's get into it. So, did you know that Vance was the Heritage Foundation's top choice for VP? Considering the outsized and growing impact that Heritage has had on politics since the Reagan era, this is significant. During a radio interview, Roberts was asked about how he felt about Vance's nomination, and Roberts stated that not only had he and Vance become very good friends, but that, quote, "As a friend of Senator Vance and as someone who admires his policies, I couldn't be happier," end quote. The two men are such good buddies that Vance wrote the foreword to Roberts' new book stating that, quote, "Never before has a figure with Roberts' depth and stature within the American right tried to articulate a genuinely new future for conservatism. We are now all realizing that it's time to circle the wagons and load the muskets. And the fights that lay ahead, these ideas are an essential weapon," end quote. Clearly, the two share a mutual understanding, and it is difficult not to assume that that extends beyond simple friendship. After all, this is politics that we're talking about. Roberts receives regular spiritual formation from Opus Dei's Catholic Information Center, the CIC, in Washington, D.C., and one has to wonder how long it will be before he invites his friend and fellow brother in Christ, Vance, to join him at the CIC. Perhaps he already has. Now, Peter Thiel and Vance have a history that goes back many years. The two men worked together at Mithril Capital, a firm co-founded by Thiel. Fast forward to 2022, and the conservative libertarian was a significant financial backer of Vance's successful 2022 Senate campaign in Ohio, having donated at least $15 million to super PACs supporting Vance, making Thiel one of the largest donors of Vance's political endeavors. It's reasonable to assume that Thiel views Vance as a reflection of his own ideological views. Those specific views have doubtless been influenced by Thiel's relationships with a minimum of two noteworthy Opus Dei priests. These are just the two that I was able to find. There are probably other connections as well. The first point of contact, though, came into Thiel's life while he was studying undergrad at Stanford University. While there, he developed an intellectual relationship with a man named Father Arnie Panula. The two remained in ongoing conversation and philosophical comradeship until Panula's death in 2017. During his life, Panula served as the vicar of Opus Dei in the U.S., as well as the head of Opus Dei's CIC. Thiel contributed to at least two of Panula's published works, and in both he pretty much writes the same thing. He praised the Opus Dei priest's spiritual influence in his own life, as well as in the lives of other influential figures in Washington, D.C. The second Opus connection came in the form of disgraced Opus Dei priest Father C. John McCloskey. McCloskey passed away in 2023, but during his life, he grew a reputation for his ability to convert high-profile individuals like Senator Sam Brownback, economist Larry Kudlow, and Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas to Catholicism. No doubt these efforts were aided by the fact that McCloskey, who had been instrumental in building up Opus Dei's presence in D.C., served as the director of the CIC. However, this only lasted up until Opus Dei forced him to retire from public ministry after the organization was obliged to pay one of McCloskey's victims nearly $1 million after he sexually assaulted her. The high-profile scandal played out in 2005, but that did not discourage Thiel from waxing eloquent about McCloskey's alleged virtue and influence in a book in 2016, particularly when it came to his ability to guide influential people in Washington, D.C. and the broader political world. I think to say that these two Opus Dei men had an impact on Thiel would be an understatement. These connections are the most obvious, but there may be more. Because of Opus Dei's policy of neither confirming nor denying an individual's status, it's tricky to find substantial evidence for all alleged connections. However, based on my research, I've come away with the impression that Vance is very clued in to the network of conservative and influential Catholics here in the United States, Opus Dei included. In 2021, Vance attended the Napa Institute's annual conference, an event known for gathering large numbers of wealthy and influential conservative Catholics interested in promoting a Christian nationalist agenda. The Institute's founder, Tim Bush, an Opus Dei cooperator, has described the theme of these conferences as in-your-face Catholicism. Even the church that Vance was baptized at, St. Gertrude in Cincinnati, Ohio, has been reported to have an indirect association with Opus Dei, although full disclosure, I was not able to find definitive proof anywhere that that connection is real, so take it with a grain of salt. It's just been reported by more than one news site, but I have no way of knowing whether it's a fact or if it's just an example of news media piggybacking off of one another. If you know something specific, please let me know. During an exclusive interview with The American Conservative, Vance stated that, quote, "My views on public policy and what the optimal state should look like are pretty aligned with Catholic social teaching. Would it not be reasonable to assume that Vance's perception of Catholic social policy has been influenced by his association with people like Thiel, Roberts, and Bush, who have in turn doubtless been influenced by Opus Dei?" If my entire theory about Opus Dei being a conduit has merit, this relationship tree from Opus Dei to J.D. Vance via Roberts et al. Would be an example of it happening in real time. So it's something to think about. And just to conclude all of this with a nice little cherry on top, I think that this quote from an article in Politico sums things up nicely. Author Ian Ward wrote that Vance embodies an archetype that has been theorized about at length in new right-adjacent books and podcasts. Vance could serve as the leader of a new movement to institute an illiberal and explicitly reactionary political order. It would expel America's current ruling elite in order to replace it with a new, more conservative one, drawn from the ranks of the new right. It is, in effect, a plan to accomplish through elite rule what even the MAGA movement failed to accomplish through democratic control. The creation of a social order built around conservative values, even if those values remain broadly unpopular with the American people. So that concludes my little section on J.D. Vance and Opus Dei. It's not a lot. It's not the most substantial thing in the world, but considering how influential the people that he is connected to are, and considering their connections back to Opus Dei, I do think it's significant. I do think it's worth bringing up, and I do think that we will see more come to light in the coming months and years, and it's just going to be really interesting to watch this entire thing unfold. Now, before we conclude, I want to take a moment and promote and endorse Gareth Gore's new book. The book will be hitting the shelves in early October. Depending on when this video comes out, it might have already been released. But Gareth was kind enough to send me an advanced copy of his book, and I have not been able to put it down or stop thinking about it since I started reading it. I have it on my Kindle, and I've been taking so many notes, highlighting so many paragraphs and lines, and I am really thrilled that some new hard-hitting literature is coming out about this organization. An article that I read discussing his book gives a pretty good synopsis of it, and it discusses how Gareth traced the organization's history from Franco's Spain up to present, including its rising influence in Washington, D.C. And it noted that Opus Dei declined to comment for the article, but it had expressed preemptive concern about the book when its publication was announced. And in my opinion, they should be concerned. Gareth did not hold anything back when he wrote this book, and he came with receipts. So, like I said, it's really exciting to have another piece of literature like this, something so hard-hitting and substantial out there and in such public view. At some point, I am just hoping that the jig is going to be up for Opus Dei. At some point, the chickens have got to come home to roost, and I just hope that it's in my lifetime, and I hope that I get to see it. But someday I do believe that there will be a day of reckoning for Opus Dei, and this book is another step in that direction, and Opus Dei should be concerned. As of writing the script, I have not finished the whole book yet, so I'm going to hold off on a comprehensive breakdown and review until I do. But just let me share a couple of quotes that have stood out to me so far, because I want to give this book the promotion that it deserves. I want to encourage people to go and read it. In the beginning of the book, Gareth wrote that, quote, "For all its talk about allegiance to the Vatican, the Church, and the teachings of Jesus Christ, Opus Dei seems unconcerned that many of the conservative forces it now embraces in the United States are openly hostile to the Pope, even going so far as to undermine his authority and plot against him. The principal things that drive Opus Dei are the cult-like worship of its founder and its own expansion. Its methods and practices have corrupted the outlook of even its own leadership, which has, time and again, proven unwilling and unable to reform, even in the face of incontrovertible evidence of abuse and coercion in its ranks. Opus Dei is a danger to itself, its membership, the Church, and the world." In that single paragraph, Gareth perfectly encapsulates what makes Opus Dei so concerning and problematic, especially to Catholics. But let's be clear, the behaviors, tactics, and behaviors have had a ripple effect within the societies in which it moves, and that fact is reinforced and emphasized over and over again throughout this entire book. And then a little further in, Gareth addresses C. John McCloskey, who just continues to turn up like a bad penny. I feel like I cannot get away from this guy. But he details that during the 1980s, McCloskey was assigned to Princeton University to serve as the university chaplain. And he wrote that there he soon developed a reputation as an in-your-face champion of traditional Catholic values, a conservative, by-the-book priest who spouted controversial views on contraception, abortion, and homosexuality with his hallmark Wall Street swagger. McCloskey got his start on Wall Street and then became a Catholic priest later on at the behest of Opus Dei. Quote, "A liberal Catholic is oxymoronic," he would explain to students, while advising them on which classes to take and which to avoid based on his own assessment of the theological outlook of the teacher giving the course, as well as of how closely their views aligned with his own and those of Opus Dei. So the reason why that quote stood out to me is because of the quoted description of McCloskey's reputation, which Gareth described as in your face. That is not the first time that I have heard that line. It's not even the first time that we've heard that line within this episode. I mean, it was used relatively recently by Tim Bush. I quoted him just moments ago, defining the theme of the Napa Institute's annual conferences as in-your-face Catholicism. Additionally, the Napa Institute is one of those conservative forces which has been openly hostile to Pope Francis while continuing to promote itself as a Roman Catholic institution. And I find the similar language there between what McCloskey said and what Tim Bush said just very, very interesting. I don't know necessarily that it implies anything significant. I don't know if it means anything. It could mean nothing at all, but I wanted to point it out because it leaped out at me from the page that I was reading. Like I said, I have already made so many highlights and notes, and I am looking forward to doing an entire episode just breaking down this book and talking about everything that Gareth uncovered and exposed throughout his 6-year-long investigation and writing of this book. So if you are interested in being around for that, please make sure that you subscribe. My impressions right now are that this is an incredible piece of journalism, and it deserves to be read by anyone who cares about human rights or the trajectory of our current socio-political system. If you can support Gareth's work, please consider doing so. I've left a link down in the description of this video where you can go and purchase the book through Amazon, but multiple booksellers have it. And if you don't want to purchase it, see if you can get it through your local public library. Libraries are a wonderful and oftentimes underutilized resource for that kind of thing. But please, if you can, pick up this book, give it a read, and hopefully you will come back around whenever I get to doing a review and breakdown of the book. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on it. And then within the vein of literature about Opus Dei, I want to kind of set a record straight. I want to bust a myth. I don't know if this is something that is commonly held by very many people, but I've definitely seen it kind of espoused by some, that there has just not been very much literature published that's been critical of Opus Dei. Like, people just don't really have a whole lot bad to say about Opus Dei, and that is actually not true and not a fact whatsoever. On Opus Libris, there is a webpage with about 400 books that were written about the organization by former members from different parts of the world that were essentially wiped from the shelves by Opus Dei. It's incredibly difficult, if not completely impossible, to find those books in print today, but thanks to the internet and the tireless efforts of the activists and the archivists on Opus Libris, those books are still available and they are free to read. So I will leave a link for that webpage in my source document as well. So please go and check that out if you want to read more about Opus Dei from the perspectives of the people who know it better than anyone else. We really need to push back against this idea that dissenting opinions about Opus Dei have originated from just like a very small, disgruntled niche group of people, because that's far from the truth. And I know that, and I know that you probably know that too, but we need to do what we can to make sure that our friends and our families and our coworkers and our society at large knows it. And I know that not everyone is in a position where they can speak out and push back against that narrative. So for those of you who do and are out there doing the Lord's work and spreading this information as much as you can, thank you. I hope that you know that your words and your actions do have a positive impact. None of us exist in a vacuum. We are all like ripples in a pond, and you never know who your words are going to reach or who they're going to touch, who's going to hear something that they really needed to hear at the right time, which is why I am such an advocate for speaking up and for championing human rights and for holding organizations and individuals accountable for the things that they do, so on and so forth. I think you get it. But with all of that said, that is where I'm going to conclude things today. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every former member who has taken the time to talk to me and answer my questions and speculate with me on everything that we discussed today. I am so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to speak to so many of these people. The only reason that I am able to contend with this issue is because of the support of former members and knowing that the things that I am doing are having an impact. I am interested in clearly and definitively pinning down what Opus Dei is and how it operates, because I believe that that is a crucial part of the fight to hold the organization accountable and to create an environment in which the violations of basic human rights are no longer permissible or possible. So I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this. What do you think of people like Kevin Roberts and Peter Thiel and JD Vance? What do you make of their positions on social change? And in regard to Opus Dei specifically, do you think, as I do, that the organization still carries with it the attitudes that helped it thrive in Spain? And does that tie into the character of this organization today? If you enjoyed this episode and found it transformational or educational in any way, please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and giving this video a big thumbs up. It really helps a lot. Also, remember, details to contact me, learn more about my work, and support my endeavors are all linked down below. Thank you for being here, and remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.